Well, my name is Jason Hundley. I'm the worship pastor at Fellowship Bible Church in Dalton, Georgia, and I'm a lifer. I came to Christ as a result of my kindergarten teacher at a private Christian school in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I grew up. And man, I tell you, I had assurance of salvation and everything like from 5 years old on. But as is the case with most people who come to Christ early, it wasn't until I was 11 or 12 that I really understood what it would mean to like surrender my entire life to Christ. And so, sorry, still trying to work through the coffee and everything. So it wasn't until I was 11 or 12 before I realized what it would mean to like surrender my life to Christ. And so I was actually at the typical, church Christian camp thing and bonfire and, the whole nine. And I just really made a firm commitment to the Lord that, you know what, my life is yours. Like it's not mine, it's yours. And I'm just, anything that I have, everything that I am belongs to Christ. And so that it was kind of funny because I just assumed in my heart and in my soul that like what that meant was I'm going to be a full-time missionary in deepest, darkest Africa or whatever, like unreached people, whoever won't go to the, risking my life, whatever. That was what I was going to pursue. And I tell you, even as like a early teenager, like I was reading books on, I have one right here on my bookshelf that says Survival Kit for Overseas Living. And I got that when I was like 12 years old. And I was like hardcore, like I'm gonna be a missionary.
Hey, welcome back to the Misfits podcast. I am Andrew Fouts, and I still have no idea what episode this is because we all know my math skills and that I lost count after episode 5. So we are here today, though, with Jason Hundley coming from Georgia, and we are going to talk today about the Four Fold Rubric, but we're going to apply it to music ministry, worship ministry, and see how we can even do some of these inter-ministry mingling of ministries within our churches. So, Jason, welcome to Ministry Misfits.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm so excited to be here. This is awesome.
Yeah, and before we get started, give everybody a little bit, what you have a podcast as well, and you've actually kind of covered this topic a little bit there. Give everybody what's your podcast? Where can we find you?
Yeah, so my podcast is the Worship Leader Weekly. Well, not the worship; it's just Worship Leader Weekly.
Close
and
enough.
And we just talk about all things worship and just church leadership mostly. I do a bunch of book reviews. Just as I'm reading books, I'll talk about them, and interviews, and I have brunches with worship leaders, and those conversations go everywhere. So yeah, it's really fun. But I did cover kind of this story a little bit. It really would have been helpful. I will say it really would have been helpful to have like a fourfold rubric for like, okay, what is success? Like that would have really been nice to have coming into like this issue.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's why that's part of why we're doing this. Dr. Linville, those of you that don't know what we're talking about with the fourfold rubric, if you go back and listen to episode number 4 of Ministry Misfits, Dr. Linville and I walked through it a little bit in terms of this comes out of one of Dr. Linville's books. I believe this is in Fundamentals. Yeah, Fundamentals of Sports Ministry Outreach, which you can also learn all about that book because we did about a 7 or 8 part series of the CSRM podcast walking through that. But the fourfold rubric is a way to kind of identify how you are being successful within ministry. It was originally designed primarily with sports ministry in mind, but we want to be able to expand that out and actually look at it from multiple different areas. And like Jason said, that includes even into our worship ministry settings. So the four pieces, the four folds, whatever you want to call it, is strategic, relevant, efficient, and effective. Although we normally break these up into pairs, and so we have strategically relevant and efficiently effective. And so these four things are how we kind of go through and determine what is actually worth doing. How do we determine whether or not it's been successful? It kind of gets rid of some of those numbers and actually starts looking at strategically in a ministry setting. So, Jason, we're going to talk today primarily from a worship perspective, but also we want to talk about this from the fact that even the area of worship, as far as what we classify worship within a corporate setting, is also a function of our outreach and our evangelism and what we refer to as evangelistic disciple making.
Absolutely.
So let's just give us a brief, give us a little brief overview of what you talked about, those questions that you asked in your episode, as far as how you determine, how you actually decide worship music just for your congregation.
Yeah, absolutely. So this all started beginning like the first Sunday of 2019. I'd been at this church for 3 years, and everything was running pretty smooth. And within
which church is that? Give them a shout out.
Fellowship Bible Church in Dalton, Georgia. Yeah, and I'm still here, and I love it. And I had more conversations in January of 2019 after 3 years of being in the church with people frustrated with the worship ministry after really not having much feedback for 3 years. And it was like a shocker, like, okay, why is what I thought was working not working, and so long story short, I was able to sit down with our elder board. We are an elder-led church with the senior pastor head, and so very long story short, we were able to work through a lot of this stuff with an elder board, which I think was really key, because it didn't just leave me out in the open and exposed. And I think a lot of worship pastors feel that, like, I'm all alone in this, and worship ministry is difficult, right? It's difficult because, music style and taste is really subjective, and a lot of times you can have really terrible worship ministry in a church and still have a successful church too, like
I've unfortunately been a part of a couple of those.
Right.
So yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because people come in and it's like, what do you leave the church looking for? Well, did my kids have a good time? Right. And was the preaching good? And then like the worship ministry, if you can say, and the worship was great, then that's like the third tier, like, hey, yeah. But a lot of times that's not like number one, like the worship was great, and so we're going to stick around. Like people will stick around for the preaching and the kids ministry, or sports or what have you. But worship is like, it's subjective, So.
And this is one of those things where, we can even just start diving in a little bit here.
Yeah.
This is one of those things that is almost more of an exclusively Western model of church. Again, the preacher-centric model of church is what we've dealt with here in the West, and that goes back all the way into the Great Awakening and all this other stuff. Even looking at Roman Catholicism, where it was all wrapped around what the priest was doing at the time and the priest leading mass. But this is not really the model of. I mean, it is a biblical model, but it's not a, exclusively biblical model of the church, because, we still see this in other regions of the world. Of it is much more of a community-driven worship experience, which I guess we probably should start by defining terms. How would you define worship in both a biblical sense and then also in a congregational church setting sense?
Right, absolutely. So my go-to is Colossians 3:16, which is really easy to remember because it's John 3:16, but in Colossians, right?
Yeah.
And so it's let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with all thankfulness in your heart to God, right? And so that's like every worship leader, if they do tattoos, like they have that one right here, like.
And normally it's in Greek also,
right?
Because it looks cooler that way.
Right. And so that's like the biblical, like there's a couple different verses, and of course there's tons in the Psalms that are admonitions to the church to be singing, to praise, and how to do that as well. But that's my New Testament go-to for why I do what I do. Because you don't see like worship leaders as like a calling necessarily in the New Testament, but we are called in Scripture to admonish each other and teach each other and use psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, and you can go into all kinds of definitions of what that is and how that plays out. But the goal is let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. And so, find music that allows Scripture to be packaged in such a way that the word of Christ is dwelling in us richly. And then there's a communal thing happening when we sing together. Like, Christianity is the only religion in the world where we are commanded to sing congregationally to our God. And so it's unique in that regard, and God loves it. We can see that very clearly in Scripture, that He loves it when His people sing to Him. And so, as far as like so that's the biblical. On the congregational side, how that plays out is every worship leader wants congregational engagement, and that's, I mean, that can take a lot of different forms, right? But that's ultimately what you're going after as a worship leader, is congregational engagement. And it's really difficult. It's a difficult job because you're on stage, you have a spotlight on you, right? And the best compliment that you can get as a worship leader coming off of the stage is not, wow, worship was great this morning, or you did great, or man, that high note, that was amazing, or anything. Like, the best compliment that you can get coming off of the stage on a Sunday morning is, wow, I saw God in a whole new way. Like, oh, God is amazing. Like, your worship led me to a place where I engaged with Him deeper. Like, that's what we want. Like, that's congregational engagement.
And this is where it gets a little bit muddy, is, from a theological standpoint, the act of worship is a personal inward thing.
Yeah.
But we refer to worship all the time in a corporate setting.
For sure.
And even what you just described there, though, as far as the biblical model for the corporate worship, is it's all about community, and it's all about admonishing and encouragement and building each other up. And it includes the preaching, it includes the offering, it includes the singing of psalms together, all these different things. But for some reason, when we start talking about worship, we immediately just go to the guy up there with the guitar, or the old lady that we're not sure how she's still alive, but is the only one that can play the organ. And so she's up there, all those sort of things. And but then we go a step further than that, the already kind of misidentified worship. And then we start talking about, well, it's we look at it, and you either have some people that say it's about the performance in a good way, or you have it on the other side where it's about a performance in a bad way, as to why they either like it or why they don't like it.
Yeah, for sure. And so what I normally do when we're talking about that, and I've got a whole spiel on this, but briefly, what I normally do is I say there's three different distinct parts of worship, and it's really easy to remember because they're all W's, right? The worship is worth, right? To who are you ascribing worth? And that's the part that we all kind of get, right? Worship is witness. There is a calling to us to worship God publicly. And so a part of your witness is to the person sitting in the pew or the chair or whatever next to you, right? Like, there is something about worshiping in community that brings us into greater awareness of His worth, right? And so there's a biblical calling for worth, witness, and then the third is warfare. I mean, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual powers and principalities. And so, like, there's a spiritual thing that's happening, and we are the enemy is united in its desire to take away the worth of God and ascribe it to itself, right? And so whenever we ascribe worth where it's supposed to go, that's an act of warfare, right? And so that's my framework for how I view worship on a Sunday morning.
Those last two, Well, I mean, two of the three, I guess, because, like you said, we all understand we should all understand the worth part of it. This is something I talked about in episode 6 when that came out of the interview I did with the atheists, as far as, sometimes we have to be reminded of what we mean by when we talk about the worth of our worship and the worth of God and all of that. But those other two are the ones that I think we're going to spend the rest of this time really diving into, because they're not only are they important for us just to understand for our own benefit and for our own church growth and everything like that, but really in terms of what we're talking about with the fourfold rubric, and especially when we start talking about how does our worship play into our inner ministerial type stuff for outreach, for evangelism. Those other two are really the key to what it is that we're really talking about. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we are going to jump right into this.
Cool.
Hi there. My name is Dan Stouffer, and I am the Director of Church Relations and Associate Executive Director of CSRM. And one of the things I want to draw your attention to is our Small Church Initiative. And what we're talking about, our churches with a pre-pandemic attendance of less than 250, who are maybe looking to start a sports or rec or fitness ministry, or maybe looking to improve but don't feel like they necessarily have all the resources to make that happen. Listen, we can get creative, and we just want to help with consultation and coaching and help you to understand that we are for you, because no one understands a minister or a pastor or a director or a volunteer like those who are currently doing that. So we're here about relationships and resources, and if we can help you, if you're a smaller church, to do just that, we're here for you. So reach out to us. We'd be happy to follow up. Check out our website, contact us there, and we will be in touch very soon.
This episode of the Ministry of Misfits podcast and this awesome shirt are brought to you by Courageous Clothing Company. Courageous Clothing Company is a Christian family-owned business that specializes in custom designs that they create, as well as bulk screen printing of your custom designs as well. When you buy from Courageous Clothing Company, you're not just buying an awesome shirt, you also are helping spread the gospel across the world through the missions that they support, such as this here with Ministry of Misfits, as well as with their own designs that have Christian-themed messages, sharing the gospel in an awesome and relevant way, or as we say within CSRM and Ministry of Misfits, strategically relevant evangelism. Check out their entire line at courageousclothingcompany.com. Welcome back to Mr. Misfits. I am Andrew Fouts. I'm here with Jason Hundley, and we are talking worship in terms of the fourfold rubric and how to apply this into everybody's ministries. We already talked a little bit about how, just from a personal growth perspective, what worship is supposed to do for us. But now we want to expand that out a little bit and actually look at what does this actually mean? How can we apply our worship into all of our other ministries?
Yeah.
So Jason, before we took a break, you were talking about the 3 W's.
Yeah.
Worth, witness, and I just lost the third
one.
Warfare. There we go.
Yeah.
I should have. That's the one I should have remembered.
Yeah.
And obviously, again, we said everybody should understand worth. But witness and warfare are the two we want to kind of get into a little bit now, and we're going to start looking at this more from the fourfold rubric perspective. So, the first side of this with witness, I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming this is both witness to other believers, the admonishing, the encouragement you already talked about.
Right.
But this also was a witness. You said, we want to do this in a public setting as well. This should be something where people recognize us by the way we worship.
Yeah.
This goes beyond just does this make me comfortable? All this other stuff. This is a
Right.
much bigger thing. This is part of, within our 5 B's of evangelist disciple making. This is where we're hopefully already in the belong stage, but we're really working on that believe side of it.
Yeah.
How do we actually, what should we be looking at when deciding style, song choice, things like that? What are biblical theological guidelines to correct, choosing of worship? Because, we want to stay strategic, we want to stay relevant. But if we're talking about worth as the first part of this, obviously there's a lot of theological things that come into play as well, because we're still dealing with God. Yeah. So walk us through a little bit. How can we stay strategic and relevant without losing some of our theological basis? Because I know this is a big argument, especially among denominations at the moment. So let's start diving in here.
Okay, so let me back up just a little bit and just, I'm going to speak out of my context because that's the thing that I understand the best. All right. And so I'm in the South. When I was growing up, it was very much like we actually called it the worship wars, right? Between like the hymns and modern music and everything. And so,
which, side note, that is also the title of David Waddell, who actually crashed our interview earlier. I don't know if we got into that in. He has written a book called Worship Wars, and we'll actually be talking to him, I believe, next week about his book. So just a little teaser there as well.
Contradict everything he says in the book.
Yes,
right now.
Since he interrupted your interview, you can now dismantle his entire book.
Oh man. So I thought coming into ministry as a new, worship leader or whatever, that was going to be a big part of what I did. It was this worship war thing. As a result of those conversations in the beginning of 2019, I recognized that we were kind of disjointed in our worship. Because I did kind of want to have some hymns still involved, but mostly I was going in a pretty modern style and whatever. And so, what happened was that the hymns that I was doing didn't feel like they fit into my worship sets anymore, because it felt like ancient or whatever, and everything that I was doing was super modern. And so, through a long series of conversations and everything, I decided that what I wanted was not a blended service anymore. I didn't want one or two hymns to appease the old people, and then like the rest to be modern stuff, to be relevant and whatever. And that strategic relevance wasn't working. It just wasn't working. That's what I found out. And so
you used a key word there, I think, that we may want to start talking through, is that word. You used the word appease.
Yes. Right.
And, this is where, when we start talking the witness and the warfare side of it, that word is a very dangerous word.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But that is where a lot of worship leaders are.
Right.
Like, they do hymns just to appease the old people,
and not even just worship. This is a problem. Even, I mean, we see this in pulpit ministry right now as well. And I mean, and honestly, this is part of where the whole ministry misfits idea came in, is there's this idea of you have to appease the congregation that is there,
right,
rather than actually doing what you've been called to do. Right. In your case, you're talking about, you were assuming in a way that the worship war scene was really where your calling was going to be at, but you can't do that in the setting that you're in.
Right.
And you even talked about this, those of you, again, Jason has his own podcast dealing with a lot of this stuff, but one of the episodes he did actually was talking about this topic. And you talk about the strategy of knowing your congregation.
Absolutely.
And knowing the demographics of the congregation. But really what you're talking about here is going a step further.
Yeah.
And really this is more about the strategic relevancy of knowing the demographics of the people that the church actually is trying to reach, rather than the people that are just sitting there in the pews already.
Right. So like I realized that my people in my church weren't listening to Christian radio. And what's on the Christian radio station here? It's like all the modern stuff that I was trying to do. Like they're not listening to that outside. What they're listening to the country radio station. And so, okay, well, how do I I'm not a country guy, you know, or at least at that point I wasn't. I've come to appreciate it, but okay, so what do I like? What type of music am I listening to? Like, where can we find a middle ground? And so I'm listening to a bunch of folk stuff. I'm listening to a bunch of Americana, you know, if you're thinking, you know, Lumineers or, you know, John Mark McMillan and everything. And so like, it's like, okay, well, that might be able to work. And so then as I started to experiment with like, okay, maybe I can take the really modern stuff, and instead of using a bunch of tracks and synth and, you know, all this digital whatever that's great for some contexts, right? Maybe if I like strip all that away, do some of those same elements, but just do it all with acoustic instruments. Let's see how that sounds. Hey, that actually sounds pretty cool, you know, like, and then, all right, well, what if I take a hymn and not change the melody or anything, not change the meter, but like bring it up into this Americana folk style? Hey, that actually sounds pretty good. And my the cool thing about doing that was what it did is it took this disjointed blended service where you had modern music and hymns, and it turned it into a unified service where the sound was the same, but suddenly you were doing these ancient songs that have melodies and lyrics that people know and love already, and you're doing new stuff and it sounds like the same band playing it. And it really unified our sound. And this is not for everybody, right? But for my church, it was right because of my demographics. We've got a lot of 50-year-old. We have no 40-year-olds. We've got a lot of 30-year-olds, you know? And so it's like, those are our two biggest chunks of people. And so our 30-year-olds don't necessarily want to, you know, have a bumping bass, you know, party line. Well, you know, they don't want that necessarily, but they're all listening to the same kind of music I am. And that kind of coffee house style, whatever stuff is actually working really well for the 50-year-olds too. And so long story short, what it did was my people started singing, which was ultimately my goal, right? Like that's how I gauged my success, I guess, is like suddenly I went from a lot of people just sitting and listening through the music to having way more. And this came with a lot of me talking to them saying, hey, it's actually a biblical mandate that you sing when we're singing. Like that's something that God actually wants you to do, you know? And so, yeah, it was cool to see that happen. But not only I saw it, I asked my elders to look for it as well. And so it wasn't just me, like everybody was kind of, and I, even today, 3 years later, I had an elder last week say, you know, one of the best things that you ever did for me was to tell me to get out of my own head when I was worshiping and look around at the congregation. And that's the witness thing, right? Like he didn't know, like it was all a personal thing for him for 60 years, you know? And then suddenly it's like, wow, I'm doing this with people. And just, I mean, it just made his heart like long to be in congregational worship with the people he walks life with. Like, that's huge for me. And so, yeah,
it's an interesting dynamic because you know, and this is one of the things where you and we can get into a little bit, you know, the strategic relevancy side of it is somewhat of an obvious, we would assume it's an obvious thing because, you know, music is an easy one to gauge what people like and what people don't. And most of the time people are very they're very vocal about what they like and what they don't.
Yeah.
But the efficiency and effectiveness side of, you know, efficiency,
right,
especially in the context you were talking, was real easy because you actually got you put some of the expensive equipment away and picked up the not quite as expensive because it's acoustic. The efficiency side of it is one we don't necessarily need to get into, but this side of effectiveness is really where it's kind of hard to gauge, because you don't, like you said at the beginning, you're not trying to be up there saying, oh, look at me, the big rock star. You're trying to get everybody to say, wow, I experienced God in a new way.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit, because this is where we get into, unfortunately, the age gap and this whole idea of the intergenerational side of ministry that we're also looking to promote. How do you navigate the people that are going to argue they cannot experience God if there is bass in a fog machine? And flip side of that, how do you talk to the people that say, without the fog telling us the Holy Spirit is here, how do we know he's here? How do we actually navigate that without becoming either appeasers or without looking like we're just strict, this is what Scripture says, and so you just have to deal with it?
Okay, let me first off say, and this is going to be freeing for somebody out there, okay? Because I had to learn this the hard way. Some people are just crazy. Okay? I'm sorry, but some people are just crazy. And
we could stop the interview right there, because that honestly that would probably end both of our podcasting careers, because that would solve everything to people recognize that.
No, I had a conversation with a dear lady. I'm not going to say any names or anything, but the end result of the conversation was an ultimatum where she said that I needed to remove the drums from the stage in order for her to stay at our church. And I just can't do that, like that doesn't serve the greater church at that point, and so that was a hard one, and but at that point it was like, oh, okay, we're not even trying to find the same page, we're not even in the same book, Now, as far as on the other end of the spectrum, where we need the fog machine and the bass thumping in order for the Holy Spirit to work, I don't actually have much of that in my church, right? Like I'm sure that there's a couple people who would really love some more production, but it's always in the context of when I'm having those conversations, they're always excellence conversations. Like, we need to give God our best, whatever. I said, absolutely, we need to give God our best within our budget,
Efficiency.
Efficiency, yeah, absolutely.
There we go. We've covered that one now.
Yeah, that's right. And so, but what I, as far as, so I have a very specific thing that I'm going for, right? Like, and that's how I gauge how I'm doing as far as success is concerned on a Sunday morning, and that is engagement. Right. Like everybody, participation, if you want to call it that, like that is the way that I engage. But what I found is that style of music can have a little bit of effect on engagement. Right. And there are some very minor things that I can find that have a slight effect on engagement. I found that this lovely blue guitar right here, that's my favorite electric guitar, and I haven't played that in about a year because I realized that my people were engaging more if I was playing an acoustic guitar rather than if I was playing an electric guitar. And I love playing electric guitar, but I've surrendered that. and sometimes we do still, break them out or whatever. But like, whether it's just the visual or the sound or what have you, I don't know why. I just know that my people sing more when I have an acoustic. And so I play acoustic most of the time. And so, congregational engagement is my but the thing that affects that the most isn't the style, isn't the guitars, or isn't, how many people we have on stage, how many background vocals or whatever. The thing that affects that the most is whether or not the congregation sees Jesus. And I really do believe that's true. I mean, this whole idea of like worship Jesus in your heart isn't actually scriptural. That's not in the Bible anywhere. And so we can, and it only works with the first W, right? of the,
Right.
it only works with the worth part. Like I can ascribe worth to God right now sitting in this chair without it affecting my face, but you can't really do the other two just inside your heart, right? And so in the book of Luke, it says, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? And so that congregational engagement, and when people actually see the truth of who Jesus is, when they see him in his majesty, in his glory, in his grace, in his mercy, if they see the depth of their own sin and the greatness of his mercy in a new and a fresh way, if he reveals their sin to him, to you on a Sunday morning, and you are brought into a deeper awareness of how great the chasm is between you and God, and how much rescue has happened on your behalf because of the finished work of Christ on the cross and the resurrection. Like if you get that on a Sunday morning, like a light bulb moment, then it doesn't really matter if you're thinking about the 3 W's. You're going to do them, you know? Like it's going to produce work. You don't choose. Sometimes you choose to worship, but you don't have to choose to worship. You can choose whether or not you're going to see Jesus on a Sunday morning, and it will cause you to worship, you know? And so that's my job on a Sunday morning, is more, I mean, I could go up there and be a song leader, right? But if I'm going to be a worship leader, then I have to be a lead worshiper, right? And I have to remind my church of who Jesus is, who the Holy Spirit is, who God the Father is, and why that matters to them right now. And that's going to affect my song selection. That's going to affect the style, and that's going to affect what I say in between songs. And honestly, like that has just as much an effect as the song choice is telling my congregation why I choose the songs that I do. I've talked to so many worship leaders who they plan a great worship set, and I can tell that they're taking the people through like the story of the cross, or or the resurrection for Easter Sunday, whatever, and they're crafting this story with their songs, and each one is intentional, and they got all these transitions, whatever, but then they don't talk in between the songs to tell the congregation, hey, today it can be as simple as, hey, today we're singing about the cross because Jesus came and he died, and that is worth celebrating because it means life for me, right? And it means that's all you have to say, and then start into the first song, and suddenly like more of the congregation, all right, we're on board, yeah, let's do that. Like, they just help them see Jesus, and everything else will follow.
I think one of the key things you said there is that, because this is one of those things that you hear a lot from people that do not like a more modern style of worship. It's like, we should not need a worship leader, because it's not about the person on stage. But when you flip that around and say, no, I'm not the worship leader, I am the lead worshiper.
Yeah.
Now we're back to that whole sense of we're back to that biblical model of a community-based worship experience, and not just we're here to listen to the guy with a degree talk for 45 minutes and go home.
Yeah.
It's breaking some of these traditional, not necessarily traditional in terms of the church, but American traditional church constructs. And that is actually part of where, this is where we're going to finish off of when we talk about the strategic relevancy and the efficiency of, and the effectiveness of, our ministries as a whole, and how the worship status fits in. Breaking down some of those old traditional constructs are what is actually going to be able to help us promote community engagement, is getting rid of this idea of, we're not just here to listen to the pastor preach. We're here because this is where our community comes to remind ourselves who God is, to be encouraged by each other, to get, prayer and healing from each other, all of these different things. So the last 5-10 minutes we've got here, I want you to talk to the outreach pastor, the sports pastor, the youth minister, whoever it is. How do we have these conversations with our lead worshipers, as far as the idea of maybe we need to start looking at a different structure, a different style of our worship to better be strategically relevant to our community outside of our walls, while still being able to engage the congregation we have inside.
Right, absolutely. You can always look at your demographics of your church. Like your church secretary probably has, or your senior pastor probably has a contact list with everybody's age in there. And just what we did is we broke it up by, every decade, and we figured out roughly how many we had in each one, and that can really be insightful to tell you what worship style you need to be pursuing. There's this idea that if you build it, they will come, right? And so a lot of churches, I think, have a bunch of old people in their congregation, and then they forget the old people, trying to push a modern worship style as the only way in which to bring in younger people. And like we said earlier, like, they're coming for the children's ministry and the preaching, right? Just the worship style alone won't do it, but it can be part of. So that's a team discussion to have, right? That's a whole team leadership discussion to have. In what ways are we going to pursue growth by expanding each of our ministries to, minister to specific demographics,
vision, mission, all of that.
Right. Yeah. The other thing you can do is use Wikipedia, right? So like our church, and we're in Whitfield County, which is awesome. And so I went on Wikipedia. I looked at how many people are in Wikipedia, and then I went on Wikipedia or Google, and I Googled how many churches were in our county. And then I did a little bit of basic math, which I think you and I could both handle. And I figured out that if everybody...
I could shock you, trust me.
I figured out that if everybody in our county came to a church within our county, that each church would average 500 people. And I realized in that moment that our church does not have the leadership structure to handle explosive growth within the church. Now, there are some churches in our area that have a couple thousand people in them, but the majority of those churches are 50 people or less.
And that really is where we get into the efficiency, effectiveness side again, is you've got to know what you can handle. One thing I will say
you've got to be able to work with other churches.
Right. That's
so huge.
That is one of the challenges that I have always had, whether it was youth ministry or as a senior pastor or the outreach coordinator, getting other churches to say, here's what I have. I'm throwing this in the pool. Me saying, here's what we have. We'll throw this in the pool. Yeah. And then, if you do even get them to that point, as soon as you say, and we're not putting either church's name on this, then all of a sudden everybody starts running for the hills and they want anything to do with it. That's a whole nother podcast discussion. Yeah. But before we get a bunch of angry letters from high school teachers about using Wikipedia, another good place to go
if you won't be graded on this.
Yeah, another good place to go is actually there's a website called City Data. Where you just type in your zip code and they'll give you everything from age demographics, education demographics. They'll give you your crime demographics if you really want it. Yeah. They'll even list all the churches that are registered with Google for that area. It's a one-stop shop, and you're not gonna get points deducted for citation problems. Right. Keep going though. Keep going. You've got the demographics. You know what to expect. So what's the next part of this conversation?
I would say so what I do on my worship team, and I think this can happen across the board with other ministries as well. You have your key people, right? And for me, that's my worship team, right? If I'm not seeing congregational engagement like I want in the congregation, then the first place I'm going to look is how is the worship ministry affecting the lead worshipers and not just me, because we're all in the front, and we need everybody who's on the stage needs to be really good at the second W of witness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you need it personally to be affecting you, because the congregation is going to know whether or not you're just getting up there to be the big boy on the band, or if you're going to actually like pursue something of God in a new and a fresh way every week. And that's a strong commitment to make, right? And so what I want is for me to be most effective by seeing Jesus. And then I want my band to follow me in seeing Jesus. And then I want that to trickle out through my congregation. I want my congregation to see Jesus in such a new and a fresh way that, one, it's attractive to those on the outside. And then two, they are highly motivated to share what they have seen of Jesus with the rest of the world.
It really is the, follow me as I follow him model.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the only way it works. I have not found any other strategy to effectively grow a church rather than people actually seeing Jesus. And I think that when it comes to, and so like and that's the thing, is like all of the other stuff is supplemental to actually like having light bulb moments with God. I can infinitely know more of him, right? Like if he is an infinite God, then he's diluting himself for me to be able to consume, right? And so like the more I consume, the more I can take. And so he reveals more of himself to me. Like, we need to expand our idea and our view of who God is in a really practical way, because there's more and more to see and to hear of who he is and to experience out of his love and his justice and his mercy and his goodness to us. So
awesome. So we are out of time for today. I'm sure we'll try to get Jason back on here. In the meantime, if you want to listen to him, plug your podcast again for me.
Yeah, it's Worship Leader Weekly, and you can find that where you get podcasts.
That's the thing that, everybody wants you to jump on all of these different platforms. And it's like, how do you mention all the platforms you're on?
Yeah.
Without it sound, without having to get the like car salesman voice guy to list all the terms.
Yeah, I also do some songwriting. I'm the only Jason Hundley out there with music, so that's all pretty easy to follow too. And so some of my stuff that I've written for our church that falls into this category of acoustic-y type, stuff that's easy to grasp for multiple demographics falls into that. So
yeah, look him up. We are going, like I said, hopefully we'll be able to do some more of these conversations, maybe even do some co-oping between podcasts. Yeah. In the meantime, like I said, look him up. He's just about everywhere we are. If you enjoyed this, please give us a like, a share, comment, rate us on iTunes. Don't be a troll, but we'll take 1 star because it's better than nothing. Those of you that would like to support the ministry beyond just sharing, if you would like to make a donation, you can do that either through our anchor.fm page, or if you would rather do it for a tax credit, you can go to csrm.org/donate, click on the donate tab again, and then select Andrew Fouts out of the drop-down menu. And then not only will you receive a tax credit and support Ministry Misfits, but that money will also be divided up and shared throughout the entire CSRM family and go to support missions internationally and domestically as well. Jason, thank you for joining us. The rest of you, we will see you next week.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Overwhelming Victory Flicks, Overwhelming Victory Radio, and Ministry Misfits Media. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. Our music is provided by Morning Light Music and is titled Rain. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com, or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can support Ministry Misfits at anchor.fm/Ministry Misfits, or for a FO1c3 credit by going to csrm.org/donate and selecting Andrew Fouts in the campaign menu. To learn more about Overwhelming Victory or to listen to our sister podcast, visit overwhelmingvictory.org.